The air in the makeshift hall hung thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and the underlying sourness of fear. It clung to the raw wood walls, the dirt floor, and the huddled figures shivering despite the late spring chill that seeped through the gaps. Alara pulled the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, the rough wool scratching against her newly bared scalp. The wind whistling outside seemed to echo the emptiness inside her. Beside her, her sisters, 8-year-old Lyra and 10-year-old Clara, clung to her threadbare skirt, their small hands cold and trembling. Their own heads, scraped raw and uneven, shone dully in the flickering lamplight. The auctioneer, a man with a pockmarked face and eyes like chips of flint, barked his cadence from a raised platform. His words were harsh, devoid of mercy, reducing human beings to chattel, listing their meager attributes and condition. Next up, 3 girls, sisters, healthy if a bit thin. Look here. He gestured with a cruel flourish towards them, making Alara flinch. Strong enough for work, mind you. Lost their folks to the fever. Found wanderin'. Nuking claimeding. Clean bill of health, though. A ripple of murmuring went through the small, mostly male crowd, farmers, tradesmen, men looking for cheap labor or worse. Alara squeezed her sister's hands. Lyra buried her face against Alara's side, whimpering softly. Clara stared ahead, her eyes wide and unseeing, like a frightened deer. Their shorn heads were the ultimate humiliation, a mark of their destitution, stripping them of even the simple adornment of hair. Alara felt a hot tide of shame and despair rise in her throat, threatening to choke her. They were naked, not just in body, but in spirit, exposed to the cold gaze of the world. Bids started low, cautious. A few coins here, a couple more there. Men eyed them speculatively, assessing their potential for work in fields or kitchens. The auctioneer scoffed, trying to drive the price up. Come on now. 3 pairs of hands. Grow into sturdy women. Good stock. The words felt like blows. Alara closed her eyes, praying for, she didn't know what, an end to this. A kindness she knew wouldn't come. They were alone, adrift in a world that had chewed up their parents and seemed ready to swallow them whole. She had tried everything since the fever took Mama and Papa, begging, bartering their few remaining possessions, walking until their feet bled. It had all led here, to this humiliating spectacle. Her only focus was keeping her sisters safe, together. If they were separated, the thought was a physical pain in her chest. Then, a voice cut through the low hum of the crowd, deep and resonant, but quiet, came from the back, near the door. A man Alara hadn't noticed before, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the faint light from outside. He wore a worn duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He didn't look like the others. No greedy glint in his eye, no leering smile. His posture was straight, still. $10, he said. The amount stunned the room into silence. $10 was a small fortune, far more than anyone else had bid or seemed willing to offer for 3 scrawny girls. The auctioneer paused, momentarily taken aback, then his eyes lit up. $10. We have $10. Any advance on $10? He scanned the crowd, but the high bid, and perhaps the quiet authority of the man who made it, seemed to quell further offers. Alara risked a glance at him, but his face remained obscured. He simply stood there, a silent, immovable presence. Going once, going twice. Sold. To the gentleman in the back for $10. The gavel slammed down, the sound final, absolute. Sold. Alara's knees felt weak. Sold to a stranger. She didn't know whether to feel relief that they were together, or a fresh wave of terror at who this man might be. He stepped forward then, emerging from the shadows, and Alara saw his face. It was weathered, lined, his jaw set firm. His eyes, beneath the brim of his hat, were a pale, clear blue, calm and unreadable. They rested on Alara for a brief moment before he turned to the auctioneer. He paid in crisp bills, counted out deliberately. The auctioneer, grinning now, gestured towards them. Right then, they're all yours. Take 'em off my hands. The man didn't smile. He simply nodded, a curt dip of his head. He walked towards them, his boots making soft thuds on the dirt floor. Alara instinctively pulled her sisters closer, a shield against the unknown. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at them. His expression remained neutral, impossible to decipher. He didn't say anything, just looked from one shorn head to the next, his gaze lingering briefly on Alara's face. It wasn't the assessing, cold gaze of the others. It was quiet, expectant. He didn't offer a hand, didn't bark an order. He simply turned and walked towards the door, leaving them to follow. Alara hesitated for only a second. She had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she tightened her grip on her sisters and followed the silent stranger out of the oppressive hall and into the fading light of the day. The cold wind hit their bare scalps, a sharp reminder of their vulnerability, their dependence on this man who had bought them as if they were livestock. The journey was long and silent. The man, who the auctioneer had referred to only as Mr. Thorne, had a wagon waiting outside, a sturdy, practical vehicle hitched to two strong mules. He didn't offer to help them up, didn't speak a single word as they scrambled onto the back amongst sacks of supplies and rough blankets. He simply climbed into the driver's seat, took the reins, and set off. The town quickly disappeared behind them, replaced by the vast, empty expanse of the prairie. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, beautiful but cold. Alara huddled with her sisters under a scratchy blanket Mr. Thorne had indicated they could use. Lyra and Clara, exhausted and terrified, eventually fell asleep, their small bodies pressed against Alara's. Alara remained wide awake, her eyes fixed on the broad back of the man driving them deeper into the wilderness. Who was he? What did he want with them? The questions gnawed at her, amplified by his unnerving silence. He didn't look at them, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge their presence beyond that initial, brief look. He just drove, steadily, his posture unchanging, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He stopped once to let the mules drink at a stream. He dismounted, saw to the animals, and drank from his canteen. He didn't offer them water. Alara, her throat dry, had to find a tin cup amongst the supplies and tentatively approach the stream herself, scooping water for her sisters first, then herself. He watched her. She felt his gaze, but he said nothing. It was a test, she realized, a silent assessment. Show him you can manage or he won't bother. The implication was clear and chilling. They traveled for hours, the landscape becoming increasingly rugged, the land rising into low hills. The air grew colder. When darkness fully fell, Mr. Thorne pulled the wagon to a stop near a stand of trees. He built a small, efficient fire, unrolled a bedroll for himself, and ate some hardtack and jerky. He didn't offer them food. Alara found a loaf of stale bread in one of the sacks, another silent test she felt compelled to pass. She broke off pieces for her sisters, then ate her own share, forcing it down past the lump of fear in her throat. They huddled by the fire, but a respectful distance from where he sat. He seemed to radiate an aura of solitude, of being a man entirely unto himself. He didn't look lonely, just complete in his aloneness. Before settling down, he walked around the perimeter of their small camp, his steps quiet despite his heavy boots, his eyes scanning the darkness. He checked the mules, banked the fire, then lay down, pulling the blanket over him. He didn't say goodnight, didn't issue any instructions for the morning. Just settled down and seemed to fall asleep instantly. Alara watched him, suspicion warring with a tentative, fragile sense of safety simply because he was there, capable and alert in the vast, dark wilderness. She stayed awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind in the trees, the distant cry of an animal, the soft breathing of her sisters. Her shorn head felt cold against the rough blanket. She was adrift, reliant on the will of a stranger who had paid for her and her sisters, a man whose motives were utterly unknown, whose silence was more unnerving than any threat might have been. Yet he had given them blankets. He had built a fire. He had, in his own wordless way, provided. It was a fragile thread of something she couldn't yet name, amongst the fear and uncertainty. They reached his home late the next day. It was less a ranch, as the auctioneer had said, and more a solitary cabin nestled in a small valley, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, everything weathered and built for function over form. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life, but the place felt remote, isolated from the world. Mr. Thorne pulled the wagon up to the cabin, killed the engine, and again, simply dismounted and walked towards the door. He didn't wait, didn't offer assistance. Alara nudged her sisters awake, and they climbed stiffly from the wagon. Their legs ached from the long ride. As they approached the cabin door, it opened and an elderly woman with a kind, weary face emerged. She looked them over, her gaze lingering on their heads, and a flicker of sympathy crossed her features before settling back into a practiced neutrality. "Martha," Mr. Thorne said, his voice low. "These are the girls." Martha nodded slowly. I see." She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside. "Come in. Supper's ready." The inside of the cabin was simple, clean, and warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. A pot simmered on the stove, filling the air with the smell of stew. It was the first truly warm place they had been in weeks, perhaps months. Alara's sisters, still half asleep, clung to her as they entered. Martha showed them where to wash their hands, a basin on a stand with a pitcher of water, then motioned them towards the rough-hewn table. Bowls of stew were already set out. Mr. Thorne sat down at the head of the table. Martha sat opposite him. Alara and her sisters sat on a bench on one side, hesitant. The meal was eaten mostly in silence, broken only by the clinking of spoons against bowls and the sounds of chewing. The stew was simple but nourishing, filling a hunger that had been a constant ache for weeks. Alara ate slowly, watching Mr. Thorne and Martha. Martha occasionally gave them a small, gentle smile but said little. Mr. Thorne ate with quiet focus, his movements economical. He didn't look at them often, but Alara felt his presence keenly, a silent observer. It was clear who was in charge here. After the meal, Martha cleared the bowls. "Best get you girls settled," she said. She led them to a small room off the main cabin, furnished with 3 simple cots with straw mattresses and rough blankets. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's warm. There's water for washing, and I'll find you some clean shifts in the morning." "Thank you," Alara murmured, the words feeling strange and unused. It was the first time she had spoken since leaving the auction hall. Martha nodded. "Get some rest now. You've had a hard time of it." She left them then, closing the door quietly. Alara looked at her sisters. Their eyes were heavy with sleep, but a flicker of relief had replaced some of the fear. They were safe for now, in a warm room with full bellies. But the question lingered, what now? What did this man, Mr. Thorne, expect? What was the price beyond the $10? The silence, the lack of explanation, was a weight. She lay down on the cot, her sisters close beside her on their own. The straw rustled under her. The window showed only the vast, star-filled sky. She felt small and vulnerable, but also, for the first time in a long time, the absence of immediate, gnawing panic. It was a fragile truce with fear, not a victory. Her hand went to her head, feeling the stubble. It was a constant, physical reminder of where they had come from, a scar that the world had inflicted. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was also a mark of survival. Weeks turned into months, marked by the rhythm of the ranch. Days were long and filled with work. Not the brutal, unforgiving work Alara had feared, but steady tasks suited to their strength. Martha taught them to tend a small vegetable patch, collect eggs from the hens, help with laundry and cleaning. Alara, stronger and more capable, helped Martha in the kitchen, learned to mend clothes, and sometimes assisted Mr. Thorne with lighter chores, feeding chickens, carrying water, sorting grain. Mr. Thorne himself was a man of few words. He rarely gave direct orders, preferring to show them what needed doing through action. He would simply begin a task, mending a fence, watering the stock, and if it required assistance, he would pause, look at Alara, and she would understand. He was patient in his own silent way, never raising his voice, never expressing dissatisfaction beyond a tightened jaw or a longer-than-usual pause. They saw little of the outside world. The nearest town was days away. Visitors were rare. It was a solitary existence, but not a lonely one in the way Alara had known loneliness before. There was a quiet companionship in the shared tasks, the predictable routine. Alara watched Mr. Thorne constantly, trying to understand him. He worked tirelessly from sunup to sundown, his focus unwavering. He seemed to possess an innate understanding of the land, the animals, the weather. He was capable, competent, utterly self-reliant. He was also, she began to realize, fiercely protective of his solitude, and by extension protective of those within his small orbit. He never spoke of his past, never asked about theirs beyond confirming they had no other family. He seemed content to exist in the present, building his life piece by piece in this remote valley. Her sisters, initially withdrawn and timid, began to blossom under Martha's gentle care and the stable routine. They played in the yard, helped with simple chores, their laughter, hesitant at first, becoming more frequent. They were putting on weight, their eyes losing their haunted look. Their hair was growing back, soft and uneven, a sign of healing. Alara felt a fierce protectiveness towards them, a determination to make this work, whatever the unspoken cost. She still didn't know why Mr. Thorne had bought them, why he had paid so much. It remained a silent question between them. Was it charity? Loneliness? A need for labor? His calm, neutral demeanor offered no clues. One evening, a late spring storm rolled in, violent and sudden. The wind howled, rattling the cabin windows. Rain lashed down in sheets. Thunder owned, shaking the very ground. Lyra and Clara, frightened by the noise and the darkness, crawled into bed with Alara. Mr. Thorne and Martha were in the main room. Alara could hear the rhythmic creak of Mr. Thorne pacing. Then, a crash from outside, the sound of something heavy breaking. Alara tensed. Mr. Thorne stopped pacing. There was a brief silence. Then the sound of the door opening and closing. He had gone outside into the storm. Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to call out to warn him, but the words wouldn't come. She held her sisters tight, listening. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened and closed again. Mr. Thorne returned, dripping wet, mud on his boots and pants. He went to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. Martha bustled about, getting him a dry towel. He still hadn't said a word. "What happened?" Martha asked gently. "Fence down," he replied, his voice rough. "East pasture." Got the horses rounded up. Alara, listening from the doorway of their room, felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by something else. He hadn't hesitated. He had gone out into the fury of the storm to protect his animals, his property. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about his character, his quiet sense of responsibility, his resilience in the face of hardship. It wasn't directed at them, not explicitly, but it was part of the same steady, reliable presence that now encompassed them. As the seasons turned, Alara's fear gradually receded, replaced by a quiet determination. She was no longer the terrified girl from the auction hall. The physical hardship of ranch life had hardened her body, but the stability and quiet predictability had begun to heal her spirit. Her hair was now a soft cap around her face. She learned to ride one of the older ranch horses, helped mend fences, even learned to shoot a rifle with surprising accuracy under Mr. Thorne's minimal instruction. Her relationship with Mr. Thorne remained one of silent understanding. They communicated through shared work, brief glances, the rhythm of their days. He was her guardian, her employer, her protector, but their bond transcended those simple labels. It was forged in silence, necessity, and mutual observation. She saw his unwavering sense of purpose, his deep respect for the land and the life it sustained. He, in turn, saw her quiet strength, her fierce dedication to her sisters, her willingness to work and adapt. One day, a rider appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as he approached the cabin. Visitors were so rare that his arrival was an event. He was a man from the nearest town, bringing supplies and news. He lingered for a while, talking with Mr. Thorne near the corrals. Alara, working nearby, couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. The rider was talking about land disputes, about speculators trying to buy up properties for cheap, about men who used intimidation to get what they wanted. He mentioned a name, a notorious figure known for ruthless tactics. Alara felt a prickle of unease. Then she heard the rider ask about them. Heard you bought some girls at the auction last spring, Thorne. 3 of them, weren't they? The orphaned ones? Surprised you took 'em on. High price too. For just girls. Mr. Thorne's voice was low, even, but carried an undercurrent of steel. Alara recognized. They needed a home. Well, the rider chuckled nervously. Hope they're working out for you. 3 more mouths to feed out here. Must be a strain. Mr. Thorne didn't reply, his silence more potent than any defense. The rider quickly changed the subject. Later that day, after the rider had left, Alara was helping Mr. Thorne repair a section of fence damaged by the storm. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while. Then, Alara hesitated, gathering her courage. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice quiet. He stopped working, turning his clear blue eyes on her. It was rare for her to initiate conversation beyond necessary work-related matters. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you? At the auction? Why did you pay so much? He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but there was no harshness in his gaze, only that familiar, quiet assessment. He leaned against the fence post, looking out at the valley spread before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost rough with disuse. Saw the look in your eyes, girl. Like you were ready to fight the whole world with your bare hands if you had to. Saw you holding onto your sisters. Knew you wouldn't break. He paused, then added, even lower, everyone deserves a chance. He didn't elaborate. He didn't offer pity or grand pronouncements. Just that simple, profound reason. He had seen her desperation, her resilience, her fight, and he had chosen to offer a hand up, not out of charity or weakness, but from a place of quiet strength and perhaps a solitary man's understanding of what it meant to be alone against the world. Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't known was possible. It wasn't love, not yet, not in the way she understood it, but it was a deep, abiding respect, a recognition of a kindred spirit forged in hardship. Thank you, she said again, the words carrying the weight of everything she couldn't articulate. He simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement of his head, and turned back to the fence. The fragile peace of the valley was shattered a few weeks later. The speculators the rider had mentioned arrived. Not politely, but with aggression. 3 of them rode up to the cabin, hard-faced men with cold eyes, led by the notorious figure the rider had named. They demanded Mr. Thorne sell his land, offering a pittance, threatening consequences if he refused. They were arrogant, cruel, their presence a blight on the quiet landscape. Alara, Martha, and the girls stayed inside the cabin, watching through the window, their hearts pounding. Mr. Thorne met them outside, standing tall and still, his rifle held loosely in his hand, a silent deterrent. The leader did most of the talking, his voice loud and full of menace. He spoke of progress, of inevitability, of how much easier things would be if Thorne just cooperated. He threatened to make trouble, to cut off supplies, to make his life, and the lives of anyone living with him, difficult. He glanced towards the cabin, his eyes lingering with an unpleasant leer. Heard you got some womenfolk in there now, Thorne, he sneered. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to them, would you? Alara felt a surge of cold fury mixed with fear. Mr. Thorne's posture didn't change, but Alara saw his grip on the rifle tighten. His voice, when he finally spoke, was the quietest she had ever heard it, but it cut through the tension like a knife. Get off my land, he said. The finality in his tone was absolute. The leader laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Or what, old man? You think you can stop us? Before Mr. Thorne could reply, the cabin door opened, and Alara stepped out. She stood beside Mr. Thorne, her chin raised, her eyes meeting the leader's cold gaze without flinching. Behind her, Martha stood in the doorway, holding a shotgun, her face grim. Lyra and Clara peeked out from behind Martha, their small faces pale but resolute. The speculators were taken aback. They hadn't expected the women to show themselves, much less stand defiant. The leader's sneer faltered for a moment, replaced by surprise, then irritation. Alara didn't say anything, but her presence spoke volumes. This wasn't just Mr. Thorne's fight. It was their home now, their sanctuary. They belonged here and they would defend it. Mr. Thorne glanced at Alara, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Surprise? Approval? His focus returned to the men. "You heard me?" he repeated, his voice still quiet but hard as stone. The leader hesitated, assessing the unexpected unified front, the stoic rancher, the defiant young woman, the determined older woman with a weapon. He clearly hadn't anticipated resistance beyond Thorne himself. He snarled something under his breath, then spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Thorne. We'll be back." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following, defeated not by force, but by unexpected solidarity. As their dust settled, Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at Mr. Thorne. He was watching the retreating figures, his face expressionless. Then, slowly, he lowered his rifle. He looked at Alara, at Martha, at the two small faces peeking from the doorway. A corner of his mouth lifted in the barest hint of a smile, a rare sight. It was a silent acknowledgement, a recognition of their shared stand. In that moment, the last vestiges of Alara's fear vanished. She wasn't chattel. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't alone. She was part of this place, part of this quiet, resilient unit. Her shorn head was long gone, replaced by the soft wave of new hair, but the scar of that humiliation remained a reminder of the strength she had found. They had been bought, yes, but they had not been broken. They had found refuge, and in doing so, they had found themselves strong, capable, and united against the harshness of the world. The valley was their home, defended not just by a quiet man's strength, but by the unwavering courage of the women who stood beside him. Resilience wasn't just surviving the storm. It was building a shelter together, brick by quiet brick, against all that threatened to tear it down. And as the sun began to set over their valley, painting the sky in hues of hope, Alara knew they would face whatever came next, together.